Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Public Sector Catering Week webinar. We'll just leave it a few minutes as people drift in. As you can see on our screen, a thank you to our sponsors for this week, Bidfood, Essential, Premier and Corn. So far this week, we have had a few different days. We had a kitchen technology day on Monday. We had a climate change plant-based hints and tips on Tuesday. Today, we're obviously looking at local sourcing. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at careers in the industry. And then on Friday, we have an allergens report that we'll be releasing with a foreword by Nadeem Ednan Laperouse and very kindly put together for us by the Russell Partnership. Today's panel is going to be chaired by David Fode, our editor-in-chief, who I think you can see on screen. We'll be talking about what's the big deal about local sourcing and dealing with all sorts of subjects around that. We have Neil McColl, Sales Director at Campbell Brothers, Claire O'Brien, Head of Strategic Model Development at Integra, Rich Osborne, Chief Executive at EM Food, and Steve Thomas, Co-founder and CEO at Ample Marketplace, who will be talking us through some of these issues. So I think people will continue to drift in, David, but I will pass over to you and we'll get going.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon. I'm David Fode, editor of Public Sector Catering magazine, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on local sourcing. It's our theme for day 3 of Public Sector Catering Week 2024, as Andrew just explained. A week in which we choose to put a special focus on some of the main issues facing catering teams. On Monday, we launched our Future of Kitchen Technology digital guide. And yesterday, we followed up with Catering for Climate Change, some resources created to help caterers understand some of the simple actions they can make to take a bite out of their operational carbon footprint. And you can download both documents directly from our Public Sector Catering website. Today, we switch the focus to the topic of local sourcing to ask a few direct questions. Why should we buy closer to home? What does local actually mean? How do we then build the supplier contacts and networks we need to put more local food on public sector catering plates? Is there, in fact, enough local food to go around when the big supermarkets have had their share? And we'll also be finding out more about the new Better Food and Drink framework, which was announced earlier this year. To tackle these questions, we're joined today by 4 panelists who are well placed to offer some real insight. They are Neil McColl from Campbell Brothers, the national meat wholesaler and catering butcher, Rich Osborne, Chief Executive of Equilibrium Markets, Claire O'Brien, Head of New Model Development at Integra, and Steve Thomas, co-founder and chief executive of Ample Marketplace. I'll ask each of you to offer a very short introduction now to the organisations you represent and a little bit about yourselves. And I'm going to go to you first. Neil, are you there?
I am indeed, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. It's a real privilege to be here today. I'm Neil McColl. I am the Director of Sales for Campbell Brothers. Been in the meat industry for a little longer than I would care to admit, but 35 years would be a good marker. Started off as a little trainee butcher back in my hometown of Dumfries, and through my path I ultimately ended up with being the brand ambassador for the Duke of Buccleuch Estate Farms, where I looked after all things beef and cattle from abattoir, basically farm to fork, abattoir, right through to the processing and everything we did across the UK and across Europe, where we actually sold some pure quality Scotch beef. The Buccleuch Estates became in partnership with Campbell Brothers some 15 years ago, and I was on the journey. I'm pretty well versed, I would say, by now in everything farm to fork. So I have worked in the abattoir side, I've worked as a butcher. Obviously, I'm working with sales. I'm very much ingrained in the detail of sustainability, provenance, grading, specification, welfare, of course. And yeah, and that's where I am. And Campbell Brothers is who I represent.
Thank you very much. Rich, can I come to you now?
Yep. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me on. My name's Rich Osborne. I'm the Chief Executive of EM, which stands for Equilibrium Markets. So I've been working in this field for about 11 years, really focused on how to create short food supply chains, which often means also local producers, and making big markets more accessible to small to medium-sized producers. We've run a lot of different projects and pilots and work in that area over the last 10 or 11 years, which has culminated in a technology platform, a supply chain technology platform called Agile Chain, which really improves the efficiency of fulfilling produce, procuring produce and fulfilling produce between farmer and distributor and on to the buyer. So I know Claire is going to talk a little bit about the Crown Commercial Service Agreement, but we're also involved in that, so you'll hear more about that a bit later.
Lovely, thank you. That's a good cue. Claire.
It's as if we planned it. Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for having me as well. So my name's Claire O'Brien. I work for Integra in new model development. I'm with a global food procurement company. So I'm here today mainly because I'm leading the delivery of the Buying Better Food and Drink framework from Crown Commercial Services. And I suppose, why am I doing that? I've been involved in food service procurement now from one way or another, whether that's working for food service suppliers or whether it's helping people procure food, be it public sector, private sector, whether you're healthcare, hotels, schools, you name it. I've kind of had a little bit of insight into that to help people procure what they need. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm here, really, and nice to meet you all.
All right, thank you. And over to you, Steve.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not from a global company, Claire, like you. I'm part of a startup called Ample. We're a very deliberately positioned marketplace for buyers and sellers of food. So that concept of shortening supply chains is right at the heart of what we try to do. I'll say a bit more about that in a second. My own background is as a consultant in technology, also in lots of marketing and charity sector fundraising. These days, I've kind of left that behind a little bit, and now I'm part of the team at Ample, where we're busy looking to source and recover, if you like, rescue what you might regard as surplus food. We don't really like to call it that because people regard surplus as the gluts that come out, and there's vast amounts at a ridiculously low price. Actually, what we've discovered from the growers we're working with is that there's a regular supply of available food, which for all sorts of sad but true reasons, they've not been able to sell to their typical multiple retail customers. And if you want to quantify that, there's at least 100,000 tons a month that never leaves the farm gate. And that's the target that we have to help those growers set their own price, not take the price, and get it sold. Localization of that, logistics is part of our platform too, getting that from that farm gate to the buyer, to the caterer, to the manufacturer within the minimal food miles is really important to our business. That's what we do. If you want to check me out, we're at ample.shop. So you'll see a bit more about how it operates. It's a bit like, I don't know, it's a bit like Vinted, but for food. That's probably the best way to think about it. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, very nicely put. Just a quick reminder at this stage that if you want to get in touch during the webinar, you can ask a question using the Q&A function. We'd ask you please to include your name and company if you can, and you can post one at any time. You don't have to sort of wait for a particular point in the webinar. And if you just want to comment, then you can get involved using the chat function, remembering to choose the option to all panelists and attendees. Right, let's get things underway. I guess the first question up is, why should the public sector be buying more local food? who can I turn to for this? Neil, would you mind kicking us off on this?
Thank you, David. Yes, absolutely. As a national catering butcher at Campbell Brothers, and something that's very close to our heart is protecting the farming and the local business industry. We're a champion, and it's very passionate to myself and our business that we do everything we can to, promote and make sure that it's a sustainable product, and work very closely with all our clients, whether that be education, care, hotels, restaurants, hospitality, to ensure that the right product is there at a price that works for both our clients, ourselves, and obviously the supply chain partners. So there's many benefits. There's so many benefits. We've already mentioned the short, the short chain supply. You're working with suppliers in and around the UK that are very close to our doorsteps, as opposed to taking something from away across the globe that may have done thousands and thousands of miles. So we really need to get behind that and really express the benefit of this message to potential clients that we have. It brings so many benefits, health and nutrition. We know that the industry is rigorously policed. If we're talking on the meat side of things here, from Quality Meat Scotland to AHDB, we work very closely with them. They are the champions. They are the industry leaders. So what we're looking for is a traceable, safe quality that we can present confidence and assurance that the product is there. Sustainability is massive. We know that we must be able to demonstrate the sustainability part of it. You've got the animal welfare, paramount. I guess we'll probably come back to that as we go along the conversation, David. But we're helping the planet as well. We're reducing emissions by taking it from our own doorstep. We've got thousands of acres of farming land in Great Britain, just beautiful pastures that actually do benefit the environment, and we need to be able to demonstrate that as we go along. There has been a little bit of, possibly could call it poor press, I guess, regarding carbon, etc., in the farming industry. But what's happened there is it's been very generic, and they've taken that from an international gene pool, whereas we're all working together in collaboration to be able to demonstrate the benefits of using British sourced, born and bred. Very important to mention the word born and bred. There can be a little grey area there because a number of products are brought into the UK and finished in the UK, but that doesn't necessarily benefit farming in the UK. A good example may be hams, gammons, bacon that's possibly came from Denmark, Germany, Holland. So we've got so much to promote, and it's very close to all our hearts. And it's nice to hear everyone that's joining today. I think we all share the same vision that the more we can do to protect the farming industry, generations of farmers and family businesses, and we're all on the same journey. This should ultimately be championing that we can promote and sell as much UK born and bred product that we can.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Steve, what's your take on this? Why buy local?
Well, the thought in my mind is I don't know. I'm not a politician, but I think if there was somebody here that was taking a sort of UK-wide view, I think we might get the reason or the dimension of food security. The days when we produced 80% of our food 20 or 30 years ago are behind us. The world is an unstable place. And actually, from the point of view of simply being able to rely on our own resources to produce the food that 70 or 80 million people need is increasingly important. Things change, wars happen, supply lines get disrupted, energy crises occur, and suddenly we're stuck. We're stuck. For the first time in the last couple of years, we've seen empty shelves and unavailabilities of food, and part of that is our inability. To be fair to our food industry, the response to COVID was an extraordinary flexibility to actually feed ourselves. However, that's in the face of a reducing capacity to grow our own. So I think that's a sort of big level reason, but one not to be forgotten, especially for public sector procurers who can contribute with the scale of that procurement to the if you like, the national security of the whole country.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Claire?
I think for me, or from my view, I suppose, on this, I think is incredibly important, not only from, as you say, Steve, the food security, but actually in enabling the farmers to be able to produce what they produce, when they produce it, how they produce it, and let them have that flexibility to operate how they should. So where's the fertilizer coming from? Where's the animal feed? Being able to actually work along the right supply and demand at the right time, rather than having to do huge volumes of one particular thing. It's almost sharing the love between our communities and our farming communities, and like you say, working the land in the right way. And I think if we're not buying local and we're relying on huge volumes coming from single places, we're not going to improve that. So for me, it's a little bit short and sweet, but fundamentally, it's supporting what we can do, and enabling farmers to do more of what they can do in the right way.
Lovely, thank you. Rich, you mentioned particularly short supply chains, but are there other advantages you see to buying locally?
Yeah, there are. I mean, why should the public sector buy local? They spend billions of taxpayers' money a year, the public sector, on food, and therefore it's a lever that should be used to change the food system for good. Neil mentioned the poor press that farming sometimes gets, and increasingly so, I would say, in recent years, is, unfortunately, there is bad farming practice out there globally that's causing climate change, that's causing biodiversity loss, that's causing water and soil erosion. And if the government's serious, and I think they are, in tackling climate change and the biodiversity crisis, the food system is the number one cause of biodiversity loss globally. It's the number two cause after energy of climate change. So we've got to do something with our food system to make those problems improve. And the thing is, farmers in the UK have the solution. They know how to resolve those. Lots of farmers already are. More would do it if there was a market for that produce. So the benefit of short food supply chains primarily is the accountability it brings. It brings transparency, where long supply chains, which are typically quite opaque, just can't perform. So by having more short food supply chains, you can start to have information about how the food was produced on farm. And obviously that dictates what happens to the soil, that dictates what happens to the water around the farm, it dictates what's happening to biodiversity around the farm. But it's also the majority of the carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gas emissions associated with farming happens on farm, not in the supply chain. The supply chain is a relatively small proportion. So in addition to everything everyone else has said, which I agree with, particularly around resilience, which is a very important and increasingly pertinent point, it's how we can, as a country and the world, address the biggest crises facing life on Earth. So it doesn't get much bigger than that.
No, certainly. So I think you've all presented a sort of fairly convincing argument as to certainly why this should be incredibly high up the priority list for caterers. But one of the questions that crops up when we discuss this issue is a definition of local. And I wanted to just try and pin that down amongst us if we could. Claire, I see that that raised a smile with you. Do you want to start us off on what you would consider local?
The reason I smiled is I'm not sure we're going to pin it down. And I think that's because local means something different depending on what you're trying to do. So are you trying to buy a banana? That local is very, very different to if you're trying to buy something that...
Oh, I think we seem to have lost Claire all of a sudden. Claire, you're
back.
Okay.
You're
back.
Sorry about that. So yeah, it's or if you're buying something that can be farmed down the road from you. So when we're talking about local, are we talking about something where the local farm shop has something. So you're talking about you're then putting money back into that farm, whether that product's come from that farm or not. Are you talking about your local supermarket because the person at the checkout lives in your local area and is in the... So it varies massively depending on what your aims are, what the product is, and what you're trying to do with that. So I'm not sure we're getting a specific answer today, but I think it's if you can look at that product from ground up, is it local to you? If you can't get it local to you, what's the next best thing, and what does that impact? And I think I've not found something that answers all of the questions in a one, to be fair.
No, okay, thank you for that. I mean, I guess we could sort of discount things that just can't be grown in this country, and bananas might be an example, coffee might be another one. But there's a sort of plenty of grey area where there are products that are farmed and grown in this country, but also raised abroad and brought into this country. And I guess that's maybe where the sort of the nitty gritty lies. Steve, do you have any thoughts on this?
I've got a thought. Yeah, very much from our perspective, we are all about stimulating local food economies. One of the reasons that comes naturally to us is that supporting local growers to sell their extra unsold crops means that selling lots of little amounts just doesn't work commercially. Now, there's a reason why big retail send thousands and thousands of tons of food twice around the UK through their distribution network, primary, secondary distribution nodes, eventually into their stores, is that, you know, economically it works, and we all pay less at the till when it comes to the proportion of the cost of a product that is accounted for by the transportation. So in a local context, you can't very easily match that. So for us, what it means is that we're looking at providing, and I think catering is a perfect illustration of this, where you can buy a few hundred kilos as opposed to a few kilos, then suddenly the local dimension becomes much more workable. It means that if you can break a half a pallet, if you can buy a quantity that you can actually use en masse, but it still only comes 10 or 20 kilometers, then you've avoided that additional route around the UK. And particularly if it's surplus, as in our case, you're using food that would otherwise literally go in the bin, get burned, or go for animal feed, and it's just as good quality. So for us, it's releasing that unidentified opportunity in a way that works as well. It has to work at a price that for example, caterers can afford without it being overwhelmed by a high transport cost.
Sure, yeah, thank you for that. Neil.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, just to sort of agree with what the guy said, the banana was a cracking example of local potential. It sort of goes back to what I mentioned a second ago regarding gammons and bacons coming in from the EU. With my meat hat on, we are protected in our pork industry and our lamb and our beef industry by the Quality Meat Scotland and AHDB, as aforementioned. That also comes with the PGI, Protected Geographical Indication, which is recognising a specific geographical area that produces beef, pork and lamb, just to give the assurance that it's actually been born, bred, reared in Great Britain. And that's very important because it is a grey area. There is a lot of stuff that's potentially not quite potentially what it says on the tin that has came into the country. I just thought, just give an overview. I saw a little comment flashing up on the screen with regards to local products. So, and 100% example of what we just talked about there. To serve a few kilos becomes terribly hard when if it's a cattle, if it's a cow. Your dead weight is up to 400 or 500 kilos potentially, and to produce two or three pieces of kilos, it doesn't justify its means. So what we try and champion is the sort of nose to tail for the sustainable side. So we're utilising every part of the carcass, if that makes sense, and that allows the producer to give us the full side of beef, for example, or lamb or pork. And it allows us then to, really work closely with the abattoirs and the farming producers locally, regionally, and across the UK. Because preferably, I would like to have select farms that gives us this PGI protection. We know where it's came from. We know that it ticks all the welfare boxes. And then, therefore, if it does become something that we can champion and push and promote to increase sales, keep costs down, and keep everybody happy.
That's great. Thank you very much. Rich, did you have anything on this particular point?
Yeah, I mean, I often hear this being debated, and I think Claire touched on the point. A lot of people, or you'll hear claims being made that we aim to source locally where possible, but often that just refers to the supplier or the distributor of the food rather than the origin of the producer. It's the origin of the producer that I think is probably the thing that's most in need of being addressed right now. We actually have a pretty good network of regional distributors across the UK that are highly competitive, very, very good at what they do. Neil being one of them, as a processor in the meat industry. But what is under threat right now are farms, particularly small to medium-sized farms, SMEs, family farms. There was a stat that came out a couple of months ago that more than half of growers in the UK, half, expect to go out of business this year. Now, if that isn't a stat that worries people and sharpens the mind on what local means, it means we must find ways, systemic approaches to support farmers like that, accessing a market that is billions of pounds a year, the public sector market. So for me, it really needs to focus in on producers as the definition of local. The Food for Life programme used local definition. The Food for Life programme that certifies the sustainability of and nutrition of catering in schools primarily. They define local as being within your county or the next county along. But for me, that's for the reasons that Claire explained. You know, if you don't have a pork producer within those next two counties and there's one within 3 counties or 5 counties, then that becomes the shortest supply chain, and that's the one that people should be looking at first. It might still not be the best one. So yeah, it's about that for me. It's about supporting SME producers within the region.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that brings. So sorry, Steve, you had something to say on that one too?
Rich reminded me. It's a really good point about how long is long and how short is short. To give you an example of something I was delighted to see working recently, a big caterer, Northeast London, were buying fruit and veg from wholesale, from a classic large-scale supply source, and they had no idea of the source. They didn't know where it was coming from, nor indeed even what proportion is coming from imported sources, even stock that would be grown in the UK. We were able to connect them directly with a surplus supplier in the Lee Valley, which is 20 miles from their locations, and then kids in schools were eating that food the following week, and suddenly we can demonstrate the traceability of that kind of line. There is a vagueness. I agree with Rich. There is a vagueness, just not knowing where the source of the food came from. Great example.
You've anticipated very well the topic I wanted to move on to next, which is simply what advice you have, or what sort of insight you have into the way our food system works, that can help to build the supplier contacts and networks that farmers and growers need to connect with the caterers, and equally the caterers need to know what produce and what growers are out there that could potentially supply them. So in fact, I'm going to sort of bounce straight back to you, Steve, because it seems like you've got some answers there, maybe.
Well, that is the perfect opportunity for me to plug my own business. Thank you very much. Of course, we are a marketplace that makes the connection. Have a look for yourself. What I would say that we've discovered in the last 8 months of learning from growers and learning from buyers, both crucial parts of a marketplace, is that the growers don't necessarily have a marketing orientation. In the last 20, 30 years, the old-fashioned concept of a wholesale market, a wholesale dimension to the food supply has diminished. And there's, growers, I can't blame them for being excited about getting a contract with a big retailer, and selling perhaps 80% of their crops through that channel. And that's great until they don't want it anymore, or until suddenly something changes, or until there's a problem, and then suddenly they've got vast stocks of unsold surplus. And to the point, why are half of them thinking of stopping farming? Because they've just not had the price rises in the last 3 years passed on to them. They're making a loss. It doesn't matter they've got a massive contract with a retailer. So because those growers have lost the local connections, the local markets, the local channels into which they can operate and sell their own surplus, they're stuck. They're stuck with not knowing that, frankly, there's a manufacturer around the corner who would take it, that there's a whole bunch of restaurants in the town or a farmer's market that would love to have their slightly wonky or unsold fruit, veg, meat, fish, whatever it might be. So the problem here is that we need to re-establish that awareness. And I guess that, that's the opportunity we see. That's the gap we're trying to fill by enabling, in an easy way, growers to set their stall out digitally rather than in the old town square. But nevertheless, here we are, and it's our job to find the buyers who want to buy that to come and take that off their hands.
Okay, thank you for that. Claire, probably a good opportunity to bring you in on this. I'm guessing that the food and drink framework has got some ideas in place, at least on how to progress on this particular issue.
Absolutely, and I suppose the framework that is really, or one of the main points of that framework, is to enable SME producers, regional distributors, to actually have an opportunity within the public sector that they would have been excluded from historically or now, really. And so what we're trying to do with the framework is link up buyers who might need that big national solution up and down the country for a whole host of product that isn't available locally and in the UK, and allow them to be able then to link in with the SME producers for those individual products, in some instances, small groups of products in their particular region, and get that true, I suppose, true transparency, true visibility of who that SME is, how that SME is working. So the Agile Chain platform will kind of twin the data of purchasing data and demand and volumes and all of this with farming practices, carbon emissions data. So actually, as buyers, you can see the reality of what's going on there and make informed choices. So absolutely, there will be a need for this mass needs to be purchased from here. However, where there is an opportunity that can be done with an SME producer for that specific product, they're absolutely going to be able to take advantage of it. And I suppose to add to that as well, whatever suppliers, distributors that we launch the framework with isn't the end goal. So they will start, but more and more will come on. If there's opportunities to expand that local SME supply chain within there, that will be done. And the buyers as well have an opportunity to recommend, add to that supply list and add to that supply chain with buyer unique lines if they're aware that actually close to them there is producer X that does product Y and they want to take advantage of that, or there's a surplus, or if there's an opportunity for that, we can tie the two together. And I think really that's one of the major benefits of the framework we're trying to do, whilst hitting the government standards, whilst being within a positive, a framework that's approved by everybody in the right way, that's being monitored in the right way, and all of that good stuff that comes with it. But it's informed buying choices, the transparency, and the ability to tap in where you can, really. So producers will be able to advertise their wares, if you like, on the platform and really tell people what they're doing.
And you can see that that farmers and growers will be able to access this, not just simply suppliers along the route.
Absolutely. So when you look at the platform, those particular products, it will tell you where that product comes from. So that farmer, that producer has the ability then to really show you. I might be delivered by a logistics provider, it might be through, but actually this is who I am, this is where I am, and this is how my farm practices.
Okay. And what about for those farmers and growers perhaps who don't have any distributor right now, or they have a distributor who doesn't work in this particular part of the market? I mean, are there still sort of barriers that to be overcome there?
There will absolutely be conversations to have, but part of this is being able to tie those two things together. So if we can tap into an existing distributor network, allow the systems to work, so that and a lot of this is in the innovative platform element with Agile Chain, but actually allow them to tap in. So you may be able to use your existing distributor network to deliver that product. So it's a massive gap today. And this is something that we're hoping to look at those things and bring them together. We've already got people on board who are saying, yeah, we definitely want to look at that. We'll definitely support you with that. And we just need more and more people to talk to us about it, suggest suppliers, suggest growers, and kind of really get it off the ground.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Neil, can I bring you in now? I'm guessing that through your sort of experience in the industry, you've dealt with or seen the sort of the food chain go from the farmers through to the caterers, and how in your experience do you think we can better improve the communication between the sort of two ends of the market there?
Yeah, I think we've started that. If I'm being honest, David, I think it's all about relationships, partnerships, and transparency. I keep coming back to the farm to fork story. We have a number of clients that we proudly supply currently in public sector that would like us to take them and make a relationship and build it all the way back to grassroots, if you like, in the farm. And it's just about sharing that intel and ensuring that everything's transparent. In the world of meat, like anything else, it's important that we're open, honest, and everything's traceable. Okay, so we have an open door policy, really. Whereas any client that we have, anyone that we're speaking to, it's all about relationships, and it is being able to demonstrate that product that we have can go all the way back, and we can then build on that to see if we can potentially grow, help, support. And a good example would be we do a lot of schools in Scotland, currently out of Campbell Brothers in Edinburgh. And very specific, they want regional where we can, as we've already mentioned, but they are very, very driven towards the Quality Meat Scotland scheme. So, we can then demonstrate that these farms are sat in Ayrshire, these farms are sat in Perthshire. The name of the farmer is David Fode, for example. He produces X amount of cattle. So it's an education piece. And I think if we can be open and honest, and if someone's coming looking for a reputable butcher, they should be able to demonstrate that.
That's great. Thank you. Rich.
Yes.
On this particular issue, what are the stumbling blocks that you see that at the moment might prevent the SMEs and relatively sort of small scale local farmers getting involved in getting product into the public sector?
Well, there are a range of different barriers faced by producers. The truth is, the vast majority of primary producers in the UK have not supplied the public sector. And the barriers range from procurement complexity. So if you look at the procurement level, historically, to supply the public sector, you really need to be able to complete large sort of documents, tender documents that are very complicated and difficult to do, and this is why vast majority of public sector volume goes through just very few companies. There are lots of companies supplying the public sector, regional distributors and catering butchers, but the vast majority of volume does tend to go through some very big national suppliers. Producers have never really been able to get a look in because typically that procurement is done on a category level. So you'd have to be a producer of all fruit and vegetables in order to win a tender directly. It's just not viable. Then the next rung down would be for you as a grower to somehow get access into a distributor that is already supplying the public sector, has won a contract. Then you meet logistical barriers. So Steve actually talked about some of these. The scale issue is one. Availability, I think Claire mentioned availability is another. So when you do have product available, you want to be able to supply it, and then other times of the year you won't have it due to the seasonality of food. There haven't always been ways to overcome those barriers historically, and farmers, unfortunately, many farmers have learned the hard way that it just won't work for them. So we've got a job really now on our hands to convince them that initiatives like the Buying Better Food Agreement with Crown Commercial Service run by Integra actually addresses a lot of these barriers and simplifies the route to market for producers, and makes the logistical element of dealing with the communication and the fulfillment relationship between the producer and the distributor work much more effectively for both parties, both the producer and the distributor. So it's profitable for both of them to work in that way together, and instill a discipline in how those two work together so that it's consistent, so that the producer can be confident they're going to be able to meet the order, and so can the distributor be confident they're going to get the order as intended, as requested. And that then breeds confidence, and distributors will be more and more willing to work with more and more primary producers as time goes by. So that is how I see it. It's primarily procurement and logistical barriers that have prevented this from happening. And I'm pleased to say that the Buying Better Food Agreement really addresses that, and we'll see that producers can start to really enjoy much more of a consistent and sustainable route to market.
Cool. Okay, thank you for that. You presented us, Steve, Rich, with some fairly alarming statistics on the farmers potentially giving up. So I guess another question is there enough local food to go around if public sector wants to start to take a share of it? And Steve, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, we
sorry.
see a lot. On two dimensions. You only have to. Well, let me start again. We came into this from a world. I was previously the chief exec at the Felix Project, which is a food redistributor in London, part of the Fair Share network. And of course, redistributors, charity redistributors, look for donated food to get it to worthy causes. And the trouble with that is that it's difficult to convince a grower to give away hard-earned surplus if it actually costs even more to harvest it, to package it, to actually get it to a worthy cause. So a lot of what we're about is to to recognize the value, and even if it's not full wholesale prices, to get a price for that food. When we quantify this, it's very clear from organizations like WRAP, who have attempted to estimate the amount of food that doesn't reach the farm gate. And at very least, it's over 1 million tons a year that never leaves the farm gate. Now, that's right across all food types. And there's just insufficient data to get very granular about that. But however you look at it, it's an awful lot of food. Our research has already shown us that quite a lot of fresh growers across the UK are literally throwing away 20% of their crops, sometimes even more. No wonder they're not making money. No wonder they're ready to shut their doors and convert to, whatever they're going to convert to, solar panels or holiday lets or whatever they're going to do with their land. It's shocking the scale of threat to agriculture. So yeah, I can tell you for sure, because I've seen it and I've heard about it and I've talked to so many growers, that the food is out there, hundreds of thousands of tons a month, and it's ready and it's being thrown away. So let's put a price on it. Let's find a way to enable those growers to get it to people that want to use it. It's brilliant quality. It's just as good as the perfect stuff they've sent to Tesco. It's just slightly too big or too small or slightly wonky. Perfect for catering.
Okay, thank you for that. Neil, perhaps if I could just come to you. There's often in this sort of discussion the claim that the big supermarkets have sort of got a stranglehold on the market, and that if we wanted to get more food into the public sector, they'd be struggling against people who have just got they've got their foot in the door, and they are, calling the shots when it comes to prices. So do you see that there's enough scope for the public sector to expand the amount of local produce that it puts onto plates?
I do, yes, indeed I do. Of course, it does take up to 30 months to rear an animal, or if it's a cow, for example, if it's a piece of cattle, if it's a piece of poultry, a chicken, you're 30, 40 days. It's all about projections and forecasting, and coming back to what we're talking about, supporting and engaging with the producers. As of today, yes, it's been a little bit of a struggle. I know that the pork production has been down over the last couple of years, if you look at the stats. Beef cattle has been affected over the last 2 or 3 years. However, that was sort of a knock-on effect that actually came from going back COVID, Brexit, but it's starting to recover itself now. Again, everything's in the planning. So I do not believe that there would be a challenge if there was an opportunity for us to grow within the public sector with meat specifically, as long as it was communicated, planned. And I don't think it's definitely not in surplus, but it's definitely not fallow, if that makes sense, David.
Thank you very much for that. Rich, if I can just bring you in on this. I mean, as I say, the retail supermarkets do at the moment take a sort of the lion's share of what you might call sort of local or British produce, is my understanding. Are there opportunities for the public sector to be able to get enough to be able to sort of say, well, yeah, we're doing our bit in terms of getting as much British produce through the door as we can?
Yeah, the supermarkets are very dominant players in the UK. The grocery market is, I think, almost twice the size of the catering market, and many times more than the public sector catering market. So yeah, they're dominant, but that dominance brings both pros and cons to producers. And there are probably only very few producers that are comfortable working only with supermarkets. And the producers we work with greatly appreciate diversification of their customer base, and having multiple markets to feed into. It provides huge reassurance and resilience and security for the producers. So whereas a big producer supplying into the grocery market, into supermarkets, may view what they can sell of their product or products. It may be small fry supplying into the public sector, but it's cream that they value. And that's absolutely fine. So I mean, I understand that the basis of this question. You're hearing the political parties all begin to commit to a 50% local figure for the public sector. So 50% of produce being sourced locally. And that's why questions like this start to emerge. But I'm pretty sure that what we'll see is, as Neil said, is an evolution, not a revolution. It's not going to be the moment the next government begins, right, from this moment on, it's got to be half of all food locally sourced. There'll be an evolution. And like any marketplace where there's demand and supply, as demand improves, because local produce can compete and is efficiently fulfilled, and people start to understand the benefits of local food, which is predominantly transparency, and in fact you're going to get data around sustainability that you simply can't get from an anonymous producer abroad, and that becomes a more important criteria for public sector procurers, then you're going to start to see demand growing steadily and healthily, and producers will be able to respond to that. Now they face other barriers that this doesn't address, such as labour shortages, but that's an ongoing issue, and that does limit supply. It does mean there are brakes on their ability to expand supply, and we have many of our farmers talking to us about that now, still now, many years post Brexit. So there are still issues there, but yeah, farmers will be willing and able to expand production as demand grows. You just need to provide them a sustainable, accessible, and convenient route to market. And that's what the Buying Better Food Agreement should do when it starts in November.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Claire, good opportunity, I think, maybe now for you to just tell us a little bit about the framework and how it might address some of these issues that we've discussed, and supply being just the most recent one.
Yeah, and I just wanted absolutely, David, and I just want to touch a little bit as well on what we've been talking about, and this is something that within the framework Integra are going to try and help with, and we're going to try and work with, is actually what the buyers are doing and what they're using that product for. So if we take Steve's example where you were talking about the product is just as good, it's just the best, the same quality, but it might be a bit too big or a bit too small or not conforming. And I think we've got a lot of that from a buyer perspective. You're talking about we have to have apples, but they have to fit this certain size, or they've got to be. And I think where we would come in along with the framework and linking up the suppliers is actually looking at it and saying, what do you want that product for? So if that carrot's got to be a certain size and a certain spec, if you're making carrot soup, it doesn't have to be. If you're making an apple pie, it's not going to sit on a plate in its form where that specification is going to be as important. But we inevitably see, I need apples, this is the spec. They're not going to choose 6 different types of apples or 3 different types of carrots from potentially different places, and they can now. And I think that's one of the big parts of this. So, the framework that we're delivering, it's got the technology, it links them all up, from producer right the way through to the buyer, captures all of that data, helps the farmers then understand the demand, understand the forecasting, what they can do, potentially, and we hope in the future, helping them to operate more sustainably. But I think there absolutely is an element of this in us working really closely with the buyers as well, to make sure that knowledge that they've got, that informed view of what that supply chain looks like, they can take advantage of, because they don't have to do necessarily all of that volume from a certain place, and they can buy differently, and I suppose really work to the seasons as well. So we often see that a menu's set and a menu is set, and if that means that they're using a product that's out of season locally, the menu's still set. So how can we help public sector buyers and buyers in general actually think about that in a little bit more granular, a more granular way, and adapt to that. So yeah, I think the framework offers all of the mix of quality and the mix of the SMEs, and we're just going to keep bringing that on more and more of them, and linking them up and working with them much closer than I think we have historically done in public sector frameworks.
Okay, thank you. Just one thought. Rich mentioned when he spoke earlier about some of the sort of red tape that has traditionally been part and parcel of getting involved in anything like this framework. What sort of reassurance can you offer that sort of thing is going to be minimised?
I think step one is we've been through that. So in terms of that full tender process, all of that, like you say, red tape and the specific details that you have to complete, we've done that as Integra. Integra are the supplier of the Crown Commercial Services Buying Better Food and Drink tender. What we're then going to be responsible for is making sure that those producers, those SMEs, that supply network do actually hit government buying standards. The relevant accreditations are there, the relevant, and that's kind of on us to work with those SME producers to say, this is kind of where we need to be. Are you there? Can we help you get there? How can we help you demonstrate that? So it's not necessarily you can't fill this box in, therefore you have to be out. In the crudest sense, we've filled the forms out, we can now help you supply. Obviously it's our responsibility to make sure that does all conform in the right way, but that is, again, it is on us. We're helping the producers to do that.
Lovely, thank you. I wanted to just tackle one last point, and it's been alluded to by a couple of you previously, and that's simply the fact that within the public sector, the the caterers are operating to very tight budgets. So as laudable as it is and worthy in so many ways to buy more local produce, is it a problem when you come up against the price of it? Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, of course it's a problem. And the idea that anybody, especially a caterer, should, buy local or buy British or do the right thing at the expense of, a significant price premium is a bit of a joke. So we have to make that work. There are lots of components of the final price. I was talking earlier on about the mechanics of the logistics, which don't work for smaller amounts. And I think that's why potentially there are opportunities here for caterers to buy direct, and as long as they can understand the quality that Claire was talking about and know what they're buying, that's crucially important. What we found, again, coming back to our angle on this, is the surplus, the distress, or the unsold volumes. Our growers, our suppliers are faced with the option of throwing away stock that they've spent all that time and effort and money and heart growing. And they're more than happy to negotiate on the price and to pitch a price. They're not taking prices like they are from big supermarkets. They're pitching their own prices, and they're able, with our guidance, to set it at a level that is sometimes 20 or 40% below wholesale prices. So there is a real opportunity from our angle on this anyway, to actually not only make it great British quality and local, but also to make the pricing work. So I'm very optimistic about that. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't think it could work commercially. It has to.
Right, thank you for that. How about you, Neil? Do you see price as a barrier to greater access to British produce for public sector catering buyers?
Yes, potentially. I think the bridge from where we were previously from imports is a little bit closer to where the British produce cost price is. There's been a number of driving factors, as alluded to earlier on, and that can go all the way back to, crisis in Ukraine, Brexit, bird flu in Europe, all that type of thing, and even tariffs that are now costing added costs to get product into Great Britain. So I think there's not as wide a gulf. If you look back maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you could probably have said there was maybe a 20-25% difference perhaps on some costs, depending on the cut and depending on the species. For us, though, what we've seen in our trends are, again, it's an education piece. Nutritional value from some of the public sector schools that we have currently. Whereas it used to be a 5-ounce portion of red meat on a plate, they want to champion locally sourced or British sourced product. They're now advocating a 3-ounce portion of red meat on a plate, or half a chicken breast as opposed to a full chicken breast. That in turn brings the cost down. And what they're doing is they're then putting that alongside some wonderfully grown British produce, so whether it's potatoes, etc. So there's always a way to try and, that does improve the nutritional side of it. But there's always a way that we can try and educate and help to get that menu cost back whilst still actively championing and promoting British products.
Great, thank you. How about you, Rich? How do you see this particular circle being squared?
So in the large part, what caterers and governments that are setting the budget have looked at when they're agreeing budgets on public sector catering is data that really is very limited about the products. Often in transactions around food, a cook will order the product name, a quantity, and they'll see the price of that product. That just isn't enough data. There's just not enough data there to make a decision otherwise than picking the lowest price. So we've been in a race to the bottom on price for many years in this country as a direct result of just not distinguishing between one product and another. If there's a product that's more expensive than the other and it's got effectively the same name and nothing else distinguishing it, then it kind of everyone would agree, well, yeah, you got to spend the less amount. But what governments won't be able to do is when you're providing transparency on real product data like biodiversity impact, net carbon balance, soil health associated with that product, water quality, waterway impact, animal welfare, social impact. These are all the data that, for me, constitutes sustainability. There's a question in the chat about this. And that data has to travel to the procurer and the buyer so that they can start to see the differences between these products. Now, it may well be that you get that data for a locally sourced product for a short supply chain, and then a product that's coming from overseas, you have no data. But from that, you have to draw conclusions. And so the first step is we have to improve the level of transparency. This is one of the biggest government budgets where the government minister, Secretary of State in charge of public sector food procurement, admits they have no idea where billions of pounds a year are going, and probably never have, due to this opacity around long supply chains. So first, we need to shine a light of transparency. Then governments and buyers and procurers will have reason to justify, hang on a minute, we can't be serving food to children in schools that will directly ruin their future through environmental harms being caused. We just can't. At the moment, we're getting away with this due to ambiguity and opacity, intransparency. But once we've got this data, you've got to believe that humans will make the right choices. They'll make educated, informed choices on that data, and budgets will have to follow suit. It'll be much harder for governments to justify low spend, low budget, race to the bottom on price once this data is in place. So that's the first step, and that's really what the Buying Better Food Agreement is going to be really pioneering in this marketplace, not only in the UK but globally. It's just not been done yet. And it's so important. It's not just in the food world, but overall for society and life on Earth. We've got to crack food, and it's got to start somewhere. So why not the British public sector?
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Claire, the last word to you. Do you share Rich's optimism that the framework can deliver on this?
I absolutely do. Certainly, in terms of the data, the visibility, that whole proposition of buying cheap in some instances absolutely comes with quite a sizable negative, and we can change that view. But I think that combined with clever buying, understanding, supporting buyers in what they can do. Sometimes you've got to start small. You know, we're not going to take a caterer, a buyer who gets everything from overseas at a ridiculously cheap price and convert them wholly onto local tomorrow. There's going to have to be a mix. There's going to have to be a way of supporting people to do what's within the budget today, make the right choices where they can make them, and increase that over time. So support to the buyers on how, alongside really shining a light on the reality.
Oh, we seem to have lost Claire there. Yeah, thank you for that, Claire. It's actually about time that we wrap things up today. So my thanks to Steve, to Neil, to Rich, and to Claire. Public Sector Catering Week activities continue, though, when tomorrow, Thursday, May 23rd, we turn our attention to the issue of recruitment and training. With videoed interviews with a number of senior people within the industry who talk about their particular career story. These are all available for you to watch on the Public Sector Catering website. And on Friday, May 24th, we look at the issue of allergen management and staff training with the launch of a digital guide that you can download and use. And on the final webinar slides, you will see confirmation of our activities for the rest of Public Sector Catering Week 2024, together with a thank you to the suppliers that are supporting it. Hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you, David.